There's no need to sugarcoat it any longer. Let's call it what it is. It's time for a change in New Orleans. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. It's simple, daily fantasy, made easy, made the way that it should be. You pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether or not you come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. Get those right and you can win up to 10 times your entry. And first-time users can get up to a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. It's a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 by using the promo code Locked On. You can check that out over at prizepicks.com, but I'll tell you more about them later. There is no need to call it anything other than what it is. There are changes that need to be made in New Orleans. We're going to break that down today. That's where we're going to start. We're also going to discuss the Saints locker room because I have some things that I think that Saints fans will love to hear to report back to you about just how hard the roster, the players are fighting. And then we'll break down what went right, what went wrong in the New Orleans Saints 20-10 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Spoiler alert, a lot more went wrong than went right, but you already knew that, didn't you? I appreciate y'all as always for being here with us. I know it was another tough day for New Orleans Saints fans as the Saints fall 3-7 up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that is not very good. And the Saints went out there and they were not very good-er in comparison. The Saints were clearly the worst team out on the field today, out of the two. And a lot of the same things that we've discussed week after week: turnovers, lack of creating takeaways, penalties. The Saints 10 penalties for over 70 yards. The Steelers only 3 penalties in this game. Offensive inefficiencies, not being able to get off the field, or stay on the field rather, in terms of extending drives over on the offensive side. Only 3 of 12, 25%. One of the worst conversion rates for the New Orleans Saints so far this season on third downs. Meanwhile, they allowed 9 conversions over on the defensive side, but also allowed over, again, for the second week in a row, over 15 minutes of time of possession, swinging the Pittsburgh Steelers' way. That's hard to contend with. And let's be honest, this defense didn't look terrible throughout this game. Early on, they were 1-4 in terms of forcing red zone field goals throughout. They had only allowed 1 touchdown in the red zone. One of those field goals ended up getting backed up. They ended up sacking the team, the Steelers at one point. Kaden Elliss did, pushing them out of field goal range. That defense continued to fight, but penalties, but staying on the field for 17 minutes. 17 minutes and 52 seconds was the difference in time of possession. That's more than a quarter. Something has to change in New Orleans. And the thing you have to look at is the offensive side of the ball. The Pittsburgh Steelers were one of the worst teams in the NFL when it came to average yards per play, right around 4.8, 4.9 per play. The Saints, 4.1 yards per play. Worse than the worst, more than half a yard worse than one of the worst coming into this game. That offense can't stay on the field. That offense is struggling to convert third downs. That offense is not looking good. And I know they're dealing with injuries over on the offensive line. At one point, after James Hurst ended up getting hurt, they were already without Andrew Speed and Eric McCoy coming into this game. Lewis Kidd left the game for a little while. Calvin Throckmorton was in at left guard. So you had a whole shuffle going on the offensive line. So I do get all of that. But this New Orleans Saints team was confident enough to still run behind that unit on a 3rd and 1 and a 4th and short. So if you're confident enough to run behind these guys, excuse me if I'm not willing to use that as an excuse. You don't get both, right? So if you're going to show me you've got confidence in these guys, then I'm going to look at them the same way that I look at everybody else on the team. You're never going to have starters all the way down the roster. Everyone knows that. But 186 total net yards for this New Orleans Saints offense, something's got to change. And the easiest place to make a change is going to be at quarterback. I know I've been up and down this hill for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks now. I know it. And you're probably tired of hearing me saying it. And I'm tired of saying it. But I have to, because it's so clear. It's so clear that this New Orleans Saints team does not have the leadership that it needs. And there's only one place where you can make that change over the course of the season. And that's at quarterback. If you still want to try to win games, yeah, you can make a change at head coach if you want to, but that's not going to happen in a first-year head coach, right? That would be a stain on the organization for the New Orleans Saints, who are very likely at this point, I would say maybe more than 50% might be looking for another another head coaching option this offseason, because things just aren't working with Dennis Allen. Let's be real. But you're not going to make that change in the middle of the season. You make that change in the middle of the season, you appoint an interim guy, you're punting the season at that point. But if you want to maintain competitive, if you want to still show free agents that this is a destination with a winning culture, even when the team is losing, right? And I want to speak a little bit to what that looks like, because you can see it when you're in the Saints locker room. You can see what a winning culture for a losing team looks like. It's there. It's there, and it's undeniable. Absolutely undeniable. So we'll break that down here in a second. But if you want to make a change, where you have to make that change is at quarterback. And Andy Dalton is not winning you games. It's not happening. Ever since Andy Dalton was appointed the starting quarterback, he was given that job the week after he threw 3 first-half interceptions in a row, including 2 pick sixes. And what has he done since then? He's won 1 game. And you look at the game that was won since then, which would be the game against the Las Vegas Raiders. And really, you got to credit Alvin Kamara on that, because he turned 2 passes at the line of scrimmage into touchdowns. So I have a hard time looking at Andy Dalton at this point and saying, yeah, he's doing a good job, because he's not winning games. Sure, the offense might feel more efficient. He might be completing 70-something% of his passes in some of these games. Not today. Today he completed 63%, 17 of 27, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and a 62.9 passer rating. All not good numbers, y'all. So excuse me if I look at this team and I say, okay, if you need a change at leadership, if you need to inject something into this team, that's the place to do it. Because everything that you were promised in terms of why the team selected Andy Dalton moving forward, outside of what should have been said, which was just simply that Jameis Winston's injured, is that the offense was looking better. The production was happening. And what else were you told? You were told that as long as the offense continues to produce, as long as the offense continues to put points on the board, Andy Dalton would be out there. They're not producing. They're not putting points on the board. And unless you get a superhuman effort from Taysom Hill with 4 touchdowns, or a superhuman effort from Alvin Kamara with 3 touchdowns, the only game in which you can say Andy Dalton put points on the board is the same game where he threw 3 interceptions and put 12 points on the board for the opposing team on back-to-back possessions. Something's got to change. And my vote is at quarterback. But we'll see. We'll see what the New Orleans Saints intend to do. Coming up next, well, my vote is at quarterback in the middle of the season. Coming up next, I'm going to tell you 3 things that I saw in the New Orleans Saints locker room after this game that should make you happy and that instill the idea that, yes, the locker room is still together and they're holding together for one another. We'll get to that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Total Wine and More. I'm so excited that I get to tell you about Total Wine and More, because I love Total Wine and More. I go there. It's one of my go-to spots. Got the one over in Metairie, go to all the time. And especially because I am a lover of whiskey and bourbon, I like to have like a big selection, try new things, stuff like that. And Total Wine and More has a big time selection of whiskey and bourbon, including a solid place where I can always find my favorite, which is Uncle Nearest. So this holiday, find what you want over at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find that single barrel bourbon that you're looking for, or the perfect gifts for everybody on your wish list. And of course, you can also get help from a friendly guide who will help you out as well. And with all the confidence of knowing that you found something special at the lowest price. Doesn't get any better than that. Find what you love and love what you find only at Total Wine and More. And don't forget, curbside pickup and delivery are available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Keep in mind that spirits are not sold in Virginia or North Carolina. Drink responsibly. Of course, be 21. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. I'm going to tell you some things that I saw in the New Orleans Saints locker room today. It might get me in trouble, but listen, you need to know that there are positive things going on in the New Orleans Saints locker room. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what I witnessed and why you should be excited about it. For your second listen today, make sure you also go and check out Locked On Sports Today. Make sure you're getting all of the information that you need going behind or beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Cam Jordan spoke with us after the game today, and he wore his sunglasses. One of the reasons why he wore glasses during the interview is because early on in the game, he got gouged in the eye. It wasn't pretty. When we saw him after the game, he opened his eye. It was better. We could see like the swelling come down and stuff like that. But it was clear when it had happened, and it was early on in the game. So I would estimate, and so would Cam, around 95% of the snaps that he played in this game were with one eye closed. And during that time, he put together a half sack, continued to get in the mix on a ton of different plays, added 5 total tackles, a hit on the quarterback, and then also had a pass defended, by the way. All the years of safety stealing half sacks away from Cam Jordan, what does he do? He goes out there and he bats a pass away, guarding a tight end. So that was pretty cool to see. But Cam didn't have to do that. And it's interesting because there's been a big time narrative around folks that are looking in on the organization saying that the team is giving up and that the players aren't giving up and that players that are injured and aren't able to get back out on the field, like don't have the wherewithal, like don't want to be out on the field, and all these kind of unfounded and I think very unfair accusations. And when you look at a guy like Cam Jordan who goes out there and gives his all every single play, who works his tail off every single day to get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. It's what he always says, right? 1% better every day. It's hard for me to look at that and agree with the takes that people on this team are giving up or that the locker room is lost. Are they losing games? Yeah. Are they struggling? Absolutely. Are they bad? Probably. Right? Like they've certainly shown poorly. So when I look at that and I see sort of like those narratives, that rhetoric, I disagree with it wholeheartedly. And when I talk to Cam Jordan, or when we all talk to Cam Jordan after, most games and stuff like that, but when you sit there and you hear him talk about like playing like 95% of his snaps with one eye, you see some of these guys in the locker room walk up and spit blood out into a trash can and say, okay, I'm going to be ready to do an interview here in just a little while. Yo, what these guys put their bodies through is ridiculous. And to turn around and accuse these players of not wanting, of not trying, of giving up is perhaps more ridiculous. One other story for you. Those are 2 stories. There's the Cam Jordan story. There's the player who I'm not going to name that like spit in a trash can and like spit blood out and all this stuff. But one of the other stories that I'll mention is Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry saw his first action this week since London. And he was hurt the game before London. Remember, he got hurt in the Carolina Panthers game, went back to the injury tent with an ankle injury, jogged around for a little while, looked like he was okay. Ended up playing again in London and not made the injury worse, but got hurt, hurt the injury. The injury was worsened. Let me say it that way. I don't like saying that he made the injury worse. It wasn't his choice to get hurt. You know what I mean? So injury was worsened, and then he's been out ever since. He had ligament damage in that ankle, and he had worked to come back. Like, this guy didn't even have a full practice over the course of the past 2 weeks, and then walked into this game without an injury designation. So to say that these guys aren't trying is noise. It's noise. It's absolute noise, and it's absolutely unfounded. So when you talk about being a New Orleans Saints fan and wanting something positive to take out of this season, that's the kind of stuff that you need to take as a positive. These guys are busting their butts. They are working their tails off to go out there and do what it is that they love, the stuff that they've trained their entire lives to do on a weekly basis. And they put their bodies through so much, and I'm watching it happen in front of me. You're watching it happen in front of you. So I say that because two things. Take a second to think before making accusations like players aren't trying. The other thing is find solace in the fact that there's a lot of coaching question marks. There's a lot of on-field question marks. There's all of that. But what this locker room is doing, the way that these players are revolving around one another, the way that these players are showing up for one another, the way that they're holding together, is because of how much they love this game and because of how much they love each other. And it's awesome. And it's awesome to see. So even if the Saints finish out this season 3-14, bear in mind that every single game they're going out there and they're working their tails off to be better, to win games. And that means something. Okay. It stinks when it doesn't translate to the record. I understand that 100%. I'm not trying to excuse that. I'm not trying to tell you, don't worry about the final record. They're playing and they're all together and they're all friends. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying, when you need a glimmer of light in terms of hope for the future, that's the kind of stuff that makes a difference in the long run. And the New Orleans Saints roster, these players, they're putting it out on full display for you. And I would say much of the coaching staff is too. And I'm talking about guys like Cody Burns. I'm talking about guys like Corey Robinson. I'm talking about guys like Ronald Curry. I'm talking about guys like Ryan Nielsen, like Chris Richard. Like, these guys push so much for togetherness for this team. And to an extent, so does Dennis Allen. I have my question marks. I'm just going to be honest about Dennis Allen and his leadership choices. I want that fire. I want that grit. I want that attitude. I want that energy. We don't see it. But these other guys whose jobs are not to be those people, but to keep this team together, they're doing a phenomenal job. Coming up next, what went right, what went wrong, or rather, what went wrong, what went right, because one of them is a much longer list than the other. For the New Orleans Saints in their loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers, we're going to break down a little bit of this game and then give you some key takeaways from it. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy the way that it should be. It's super simple. You're not playing against people with the old rosters. You're not dealing with injuries and roster management and, I need more IR spots and my commissioner's, a jerk. You know who I'm talking to. No, I'm just joking. I'm not playing fantasy football this season. Well, I'm in fantasy football leagues, but I'm not playing them because I'm spending my time with Prize Picks instead. Because then all I have to do is pick 2 to 5 players. I don't have to play against some kind of shadow roster or anything like that. I just pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. I get those right, and I go into 10 times my entry, and so can you. And especially if you're a first-time user, you can head over to prizepicks.com today or use the Prize Picks app, and you can get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 simply by using the promo code LOCKED ON. So all you got to do, sign up, first-time user, promo code LOCKED ON. You put down $100, they'll match $100. Put down $50, they'll match $50. That simple. Prizepicks.com and the Prize Picks app. 100% instant deposit match up to $100 for new users by simply using the promo code LOCKED ON. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at what went wrong, what went right. A lot of things did not go right for the New Orleans Saints over on the offensive side. We broke down some of the numbers earlier, but a very inefficient day by the New Orleans Saints. Offense, only 4.1 yards per play. 1.9 was the average on the ground. So what didn't work? The run game. And some of that has to do with, a banged up offensive line for sure. The other part of it just has to do with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They just did a fantastic job up against the run. TJ Watt brought exactly what it is, the type of boost that you thought he was going to bring. That guy is a quarter of their salary cap spending over on the defensive side. He was outstanding in this game and was a difference maker. Even when he wasn't making plays, he was getting the crowd riled up. He was in the backfield, getting everybody pumped up, cheering everybody on the defensive side. That kind of stuff makes a difference and would be something that would be beneficial for the New Orleans Saints as well, to have that kind of energy, right? So that was something that clearly didn't work for the New Orleans Saints. 1.9 yards per carry on the ground. Very, very, very inefficient day. On the opposite side of the ball, the Pittsburgh Steelers average 5 yards per carry, including a 20-carry, 99-yard day by Najee Harris, who has been remarkably up and down throughout his career so far since getting to the NFL and getting to these Pittsburgh Steelers. 1 yard away from being the third 100-yard rusher given up by this New Orleans Saints defense. Kenny Pickett, 8 rushes for 51 yards. He was pesky, is the word that I would use. Escaped a lot of sacks, although he was sacked quite a bit in this game. New Orleans Saints defense coming together for several sacks in this one, including some half sacks and things like that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sacks in this game. You had one from Chris Harris Jr. You had one from Tano Passanio. You had one from David Onyemata. You had a half sack between Carl Granderson and Cam Jordan, which was like Kenny Pickett basically falling over, and those guys were just there to get the credit for it. Kaden Elliss with a huge blindside sack. He was a bright spot in this game. 7 total tackles. So you want to know what went right? Kaden Elliss went right. 7 total tackles, 1 sack in this game that forced 7 yards. And that's important in context because it was a 3rd down sack and it pushed them out of field goal range as well. He also had a quarterback hit, a tackle for a loss, and he forced a fumble that the New Orleans Saints defense unfortunately did not pick up. One of my bold predictions going into this week is that Kaden Elliss would somehow contribute to 2 different turnovers, whether it would be some combination of an interception, a fumble force that was recovered by the Saints defense, or a fumble recovery on his own. I almost got half of that right. Unfortunately, didn't get the whole thing right. When he forced the fumble that right after, actually, it was right off of one of the interceptions that was thrown by Andy Dalton in the New Orleans Saints offense, almost flipped the ball right back over to the Saints offense, which would have been outstanding, but unfortunately they couldn't get on top of the ball. Malcolm Roach had a sack as well. Several hits on the quarterback all throughout. And then in terms of sacks for Pittsburgh, two sacks for Pittsburgh, Alex Highsmith on both of those. The Saints really, really, really targeted and went after the interior of that defense. I want to make sure I say this name correctly. I'm going to say Spillane, I think is the right name for the one of the linebackers for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They targeted him. They went after him. They tried to isolate Alvin Kamara on him. Didn't work though. And it's not that Spillane made like good plays on the ball. It's that some of the throws were off target. You saw Taysom Hill throw one that was outside the frame. You saw a couple of passes from Andy Dalton over the middle that were behind receivers, that were low, that were high, that were all these things. And then, of course, you had the one that was across the middle to Jarvis Landry that popped off of his hands and then ended up in the hands of a waiting defensive back. I feel like we've seen more tipped interceptions not going the Saints' way than you're used to seeing for the New Orleans Saints in previous seasons. Correct me if I'm wrong, but definitely seen a lot of that. And the other thing that didn't go right for the New Orleans Saints, the other thing that went wrong was penalties. 10 penalties for the New Orleans Saints that resulted in over 70 yards of penalty yardage, 74. And then 3 penalties for the Pittsburgh Steelers that resulted in 40 yards. And the Saints gave up 5 first downs on penalties. 5 first downs on penalties. So when you look at the fact that the efficiency metrics show that the Steelers were 9 of 17 on 3rd down, you add in the extra extending of drives from the penalties on top of that. So a struggle, big time struggling day for the New Orleans Saints. On the offensive side, in particular, not being able to stay on the field, again, surrendering time of possession by over 17 minutes in this game. 17 minutes and 52 seconds is the difference in time of possession. That's tough for any defense to stay on the field, especially an injured defense as well. But man, it's still a bit of a struggle over on the defensive side too, because you had the penalties. One other bright spot, one other thing that went right. The game is slowing down for Rashid Shaheed. I spoke to him after the game and I told him, like, man, it looked like you were just inches away each time from breaking off a big return. Unfortunately, one of his bigger returns got erased on a holding penalty or a penalty by Traquan Smith that ended up bringing it back considerably. But man, he was just like this far away. And that's one of those things that the Saints you would usually rely on when it came to bolstering the offense, right? Bolstering the energy around the team. And so when you're a team that's struggling to, find energy on the field with big plays or a lack of big plays, turnovers, kind of, bottoming out your momentum, all these other things, you start to look for those other places where you can get that jolt. And so close was Rashid Shaheed to being that guy. One more thing that I thought went well for the New Orleans Saints was PJ Williams. I thought PJ Williams, who did not practice on Friday with illness, came into this game questionable, but was able to play. Same thing for Tano Passanio, by the way, and then Tano Passanio got a sack. I thought PJ Williams played pretty well. I don't think he showed up, remarkably on the stat sheet or anything like that. But in terms of, what could have been, he did show up tremendously on the stat sheet. He had 11 tackles in this game. He was the leader in tackles for you, which is never good when that's your safety, right? Especially the guy that's playing your deep safety role on top of that. Oh, man, that's tough. But hey, you know what? A lot of those big plays and things like that we saw given up with Marcus May out of the lineup against the Seattle Seahawks, against the Minnesota Vikings, those plays weren't necessarily there, with the exception of a couple that were mostly off toward the sideline. So I thought PJ Williams played well in terms of what he was called upon to do. But those are really your bright spots. Tell me your bright spots if you got more. You can let me know in the comments over on YouTube, or you can hit me up on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola. Coming up tomorrow, it's going to be Tuesday, Analytics Tuesday, so we're going to break things down from a numbers perspective. A lot of penalties on Alontae Taylor, a lot of penalties on Paulson Adebo. Paulson Adebo continues to struggle. The sophomore slump is real with him. Where does he rank across qualifying cornerbacks? We'll give you that answer tomorrow. And then we'll take a look at more of the raw data as well to see how these guys performed. And we'll be meeting with DA on Monday afternoon. So we'll see if maybe there's some changes on the way at that time. I appreciate you. As always, make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. I know it's tough right now with the New Orleans Saints 3-7, but I appreciate you so much for continuing to support the show, continuing to support me, continuing to support the Locked On Podcast Network. I love being here with you every single Monday through Friday, and no matter what happens with the team, I will always be here doing that, and I will always be happy to be here doing that. So thank you so much for making me a part of your day and making me a part of your routine. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports Today as your second listen today. Get the take of the day, all the big game reactions, all the big game recaps, all the big information that you need in less than 30 minutes every single day, all across the world of sports. You'll find that on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show, and for continuing to support. As always, if you see me, say hi. Thank you to those of you who did here in Pittsburgh. Really appreciate getting to see folks wherever we go. I'm so excited about all of it. So thank you for taking the time. And as always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.